Welcome, everyone, to episode 16 of our FLGHome podcast with Ashley Berardi with Remax Fine Living.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
This is our second take on that because we were talking about everything changing. That's one thing that hasn't really changed too recently. But, man, Ashley, we were just talking for probably about 10, 15 minutes before this, and I just wanted to just dig into all the things because there are so many things. So where do you want to start?
All the time. I think, we were talking about how, we've definitely seen a change in the market. We're starting to see a little bit of a change, a little more activity. It's been busy. It's been busy, especially, I'd say, the last week and a half. A lot going on.
Yes. And this is where I think, just in what I didn't get to say, as I'm talking about my conspiracy theories and all these different things, that we'll get into everything here and try and unpack as much as we can. But I think I want to simplify it to maybe, as we talk about different things, it fits into two veins. That first is, three things. There are a lot of changes there, and they're happening rapid.
Yes.
And I, first and foremost, empathize with anyone wanting to make a move, whether it's a strategic financial, second home, Airbnb, investment, or this is your, forever home goal, right? And you're caught in this market whirlwind right now. I empathize with you.
Right. Exactly.
Right? So I think that's number one, is we empathize with you. We're not jealous of anyone.
No.
I make jokes to people all the time, whether this is a good joke or not, of when people are like, hey, I want to get my first investment. And I kind of say, because I've done that. I built some portfolio, and I was like, I was able to be a lot dumber than you have to be. You just have to be smarter than me.
Right. You have to do your research now.
Yeah.
You really do. You have to do your research, and you have to do a thorough job with it and really know what you're getting into.
And your team.
Yes.
Realtor team and stuff, and your lender team, that makes a difference. Whereas you could kind of just trip and fall into some great opportunities in the last decade.
Exactly. I mean, it's, all of us are working in this together, and we all have different information. And so it's, a bunch of minds kind of coming together to talk about it.
Yeah. So you got to be super smart on this. And then, so getting to the rest of my list of two things here is then the mainstream media is not shooting you straight.
No. And I think what's hard, too, is that Flagstaff's market is so different. It's so different than Phoenix's market, Tucson's, then New York, LA. It's all so different. But there's a lot of different parts to it, too, I think, that make it different that people don't really understand until you explain it. And I think part of that is that it's almost like I look at it as like a trifecta. So we're landlocked.
Yep. We've
got Forest Service all around us. So
you
can't overbuild here. Okay, so that's what kind of helps Flagstaff values stay when everyone else is kind of changing. You have the university here. So university is looking to expand and grow, and those parents of those students, they don't want to rent. They see the value in buying, a condo or a home or whatever. And so you've got that buyer that comes into it that's, taking up some of the real estate. You've got, a big major hospital here. You've got big employers here. So there's a lot that's kind of driving the Flagstaff market. And then, of course, Phoenix gets hot and we're not. And so, when Phoenix weather gets up in the hundreds, it's nice and cool up here. So then you've got people that want to escape Phoenix. So those things aren't going to change. They're just part of it, and the market just kind of flows with it.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, going a little bit deeper or into that trifecta in that number two, if I'm tracking this right, of employers in general, right? We don't have, and I want people to understand, what is it? Cycles die on euphoria, right? Have you heard that market of markets build on optimism and scale on the excitement, and then they die on the euphoria. And we've been through that euphoria, and markets come down a little bit, but that's the hard part, is saying, hey, here in Flagstaff, we don't have these large industries that are letting half their workforce go.
Right.
And now all of a sudden a large neighborhood supporting some plant.
Yep.
We don't have a plant or that type of, recession. We're highly medical. Even Gore is highly medical.
Exactly.
And, people are going to have an operation one way or another. Right, good economy, bad economy. They're still going to be putting those stints in people.
Especially with it being a level 1 trauma. I mean, it's a big hospital, and then you've also got the aspect of tourism feeding in here. Grand Canyon's not going anywhere.
The more you say this, I'm just like, I need to put my head under a rock.
It's not going anywhere. So, I mean,
and then in that third category, though, I define that as I try and talk to people, not that I'm changing your trifecta here, but I think that's, if I summarize that, is the demand demographic.
Yeah. It's always there. It just changes a little bit, and it might slow down a little bit with the market, but it's still there.
Yeah, you have the growth from Phoenix. You have the growth. They have so many different things that we are just uniquely positioned as a little city. So and we're talking with folks like still like one of the biggest pieces. And I apologize, everyone, as we jump around here because it's like I didn't even finish my first list on it. We'll get to that. In that, one of the steady things about that. So if we talk about there's supply and demand, right, and we just kind of hit those, right. The inventory here is limited. And
it's low.
Not only has there been a historic strong demand for Flagstaff because of the primary buyer, the second home buyer, the student buyer, right? All these different factors. We know, like just factually know, that we have a generational birth rate wave. Right. The median home buyer age is 33 years old, and we haven't seen this many 33-year-olds walking around wanting homes since the boomers, so 50 years ago. And so that's why I think a lot of people kind of miss that. Not that we're wanting to be euphoric about this and be like, housing's just going to go. Like, what is that whole sorry on the whole, and I don't get that much in the stock market games with like going to buy GameStop. It's like everything just goes up. There's moves, and we've seen some moves here. And I guess where I'm going with it is just knowing, again, people have to be smarter, and there's lots of shifts happening in the industry. And I think, so let's talk about some of the thoughts. Like we're finding, hey, here's the strategy for people, and here's what I would be thinking as a buyer. But I also want to caution in the sense of, I think some of the things we were talking about we might be chasing as an industry, right? We're a step behind what's happening next to some extent.
Right. And I think a lot of it is, there's people are fearful just because of like what happened in 2008. Yeah. And so, but it's not the same. No. It's not the same. I mean, people have never had this much equity in their homes. There is a ton of equity in those homes. Yeah. And prices they're not falling. They may stay flat. They may decrease a little bit, but then I'm still seeing some multiple offers on properties. It just depends.
We've seen a massive increase in applications at the end of the year and with the holidays. And there's a seasonality in general, right? Yep. And that's the hard part is we can't just jump on the piggyback of the season. Right?
Exactly. We're in winter. It's typically slower. People get busy with Thanksgiving, Christmas.
60 inches of snow in January, Ashley.
I know. None of us could leave our houses. We're all trying to dig out. But even in that, there were houses closing. Yeah. I had two different properties closed. One was a home and one was an NAU student condo. And so they both closed, last month. Yeah. It's still happening.
Yeah. So, but that's where knowing that we had that seasonality in general, although 7% rates in October didn't help, we've already seen them come down and we're seeing kind of that thaw already happening to where I guess when we talk through a bunch of different things, we've experienced a lot of different things. Yep. And they're very rapidly. Yeah. Right. And so so we rolled out in the summer of last year, right? We rolled out a cash offer product. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, we're like 6 to 12 months late on this. Right. Because then the market was shifting. Right. People weren't even, I was telling my wife, I was like, I wish we could just break all this down for people to understand of like people didn't want 7% rates. Mm-hmm. And then because of higher rates, and then when we basically on the back end of loans where it's purchased and managed, and that's just how the secondary market works. Right. Like the secondary market didn't want these loans because they think, hey, they're just going to refinance as soon as the market turns. And we're smart enough to know this is a boom bust cycle. Right. And so I was like, honey, I was telling my wife, I was like, what do? I have people that don't want the loans and the people that want to buy the loans. And I'm the guy in the middle. So I was like, what do I do? As we make things work and find people that are willing to take advantage of the opportunity. And so all of a sudden, in the last couple months, we've seen great opportunities for buyers that wanted to get some seller credits, that made use of tools like a 2-1 buy down.
Yep. I think it's one of those things you look at different ways, but what I've seen is a lot of my buyers that have still been in the market and aren't scared off by the interest rates, they're the ones buying this is like a second home or it's an investment property. They're not scared off by this because in their mindset, they're taking advantage of the market because, sellers want to sell. They're not having to compete with these crazy offers and give away, everything that they own to buy the property. And they can there's these different products out there. Like, I think the 2-to-1 buy down might be an option for some people, because most people are going to refinance this loan anyways before the 2 years is up. That's just how their mind works, especially the second home buyer.
Yeah.
That's how they work. They're not scared off by it. They know that the market's going to change and that, interest rates will change. And it's just a moment. Yeah. It's just a moment right now.
Yeah.
It's not forever. It's just a moment, and they'll readjust it later.
Yeah. And so it is, well, and there's so many different ways I want to enter in on this one, because it's like on one side of things, like I get that people don't like, we like predictable, right? Yes. You like to go on Amazon, see what the price is.
See what the reviews are.
See what the reviews are. Take some time and click, and that's the price, and that's the deal, and that's it, right? But knowing that, okay, this is one of the biggest investments of your life.
By their largest, right.
Yeah, and biggest debt and different things like that. And you are going to have to be comfortable knowing that this is subject to two different markets, interest rate and housing market, that are two different markets going through two different crazy things right now, and very highly localized on the housing market side of things, whereas then the national rate market is it's crazy. Right. Anytime I talk to someone, so there's in mortgage companies, there's a secondary department, right? And whoever locking the loans and then managing where's the market going, where are the rates going, and all these different things. Like, it's just God bless them, because like
I couldn't do it.
No, like we've seen such massive market shifts in a day, where it's just like, what is happening, right? Anyways, so where I'm heading with some of this is that people then having to trust that there's going to be, we got to do some things and get creative, but within this isn't 2006, 2008 creativity,
right?
But so where we're going with that, like a 2-1 buy down, like initially, when we do what's called a permanent buy down, just to kind of explain to the general public right here, that, if they or the seller want to put some money towards saying we're going to buy that interest rate down and it's permanent. The nice thing is that's permanent. The rate. It's permanent. The downside is that if you spend $10,000 on getting lower interest rate, you say, hey, let's just get that lower interest rate. Let's spend $10,000 on, not on the house, not on closing costs, on rate.
Right.
And then in 6 months, 12 months, I call you and say, hey, guess what? This inflation finally came down, and just like happened in the 70s and 90s, interest rates have come down as well. So do you really want that 5.5 that you bought down to, or do you want this 4.5 that I can give you?
Right.
You're going to say, give me the 4.5.
Right.
But that $10,000 you spent,
it's gone.
Up in smoke.
It's gone.
Okay.
And I think that's where the 2-to-1 buy down is an interesting concept, because, one, the seller pays for it. Yep. So seller pays, you have to ask for that in seller concessions,
yes.
Which is like a credit from the seller. So you ask for that, and then the difference is the buyer has to qualify at that high interest, that
Correct.
higher
so
interest rate.
Crazy 0608.
There's no subprime. There's a cap. Yeah. There's a cap at it. They have to qualify at it. So I look at it as they know what the worst would be.
Yeah.
That's the worst rate they could get. But I don't know. I'm an optimist. Glass half full. And so, but then the nice part is that rate, they get the lower rate that's 2 points down, correct?
Yep, 2 points lower the first year.
2 points lower the first year. Then the next year, it goes up another point. And then the following year, it will max out at that cap rate that you had. So
and then that's fixed. It's not like an adjustable.
Fixed. Yeah. It's fixed.
Yeah.
But the nice part is that most buyers are probably going to they're going to refinance that loan by that time before that cap ever hits. And so what's nice then is that money that the seller has given them, it stays in an escrow account. Let's just say they refinance it the first year.
Yep.
Well, they've got a whole year's money left there that was supposed to, pay for that lower rate that now they can use. If they refinance it, it can pay for the refinance. They might even have some left over. So it's kind of like it's sitting there.
Yeah.
So you have, I don't know, it's like a 50-50 shot.
So you're not all committed and all in. My concern here, though, right, is we're seeing, so just like we came up with our cash product, right? And then all of a sudden, and you and I were talking that a lot of analysts have looked at it and basically said the market has shifted. It took just under 2 years in 06, 08 to shift as far as slowdown and activity and perspective, that we people, again, I empathize with people. They've had about 6 months to digest all this.
Right.
And now we're starting to see what's this next phase. And I don't know. You're the licensed realtor. I don't know if we're going to see as much seller goodwill in wanting to do that. Because it's
right.
maximize that goodwill. Are they going to do repairs? Are they going to pay for closing costs or even beyond to buy downs or seller or price reductions? There's all sorts of different ways you could use a seller goodwill, or negotiations, room of negotiations. I'm already hearing cash, multiple cash. Mm-hmm. I'm already hearing, it's going within a week now. Like just the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks, it's definitely picked up. And it depends on the property. It really depends on the property. I'm definitely seeing the second homes kind of seeing a little bit more activity, and then especially like the condos for like if it's near the university, those you're seeing multiples on them. Yeah. And, and you're seeing the cash. So, I mean, it's hard because the 2-to-1 buy down, I think it would have been great if people utilized this a couple of months ago. Yeah. But, I mean, some sellers, it depends on their situation.
In the right situation.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, sellers, they have all this equity still in their homes. The homes prices haven't completely fallen off a cliff or anything like that. So, I mean, it's gone down a little bit, but not dramatically. And so they still have this good chunk. And so it just depends on the seller. If they want to move somewhere else, let's say they're tired of shoveling snow. They want to move somewhere warmer, you know what I mean? And they have to sell this house in order to fund their next house. Yeah. They might be open to it. It's one of those things where I think a buyer today needs all the different information that they can get their hands on and know what their options are, because it's not as simple as just FHA, conventional. There's different products, and it's good to know if it works for you or if it doesn't. And I think that's why I've seen a lot more of like my second home buyers and, investors in the market. And I don't want to say investors, but they're like their parents buying it for students and stuff, just because in their mind, they're going to refinance this thing. Yeah. They're not scared by it. And they're taking advantage of the market because they're not having to compete against a whole bunch of other people in certain products. Yeah. But they're also, they're not having to overpay for something either. Yeah. And they know that the market's eventually going to come around. It's not I buy today and then I sell it in 6 months. That's not the situation. You've got to let that equity kind of build up over time.
Sure. And I think so much of this really comes down, as I'm thinking through it a lot, is when you do something even the second time, like how much easier
it is. I think, yes. When it's the second time, it's not as scary. Yeah. It's, you're kind of like, you've seen what's changed with markets, and you're used to it. Where, I mean, I remember, when I was in my 20s, I don't remember my parents buying houses, or even though we moved, they bought a couple of houses during my childhood, but I'm like, I don't remember it at all.
Well, and it's almost like, I just finished reading this book, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek. Okay. And he did, super good book. And he dives into a lot of the different, like how we are wired, right, as human beings, and how, and one of the things, and this wasn't necessarily in his, very similar kind of connotations, but I've heard this kind of perspective elsewhere, is like our caveman brains are first identifying like what is going to kill you. Right? You need to walk outside and see everything that's going to hurt you. And I think when you go through a real estate transaction at first, you feel that caveman brain is saying like any one of these things, the realtor, the other realtor, the seller, this disclosure, this process, the appraisal, like all these things could kill me. Yeah. Right. And you're really hypersensitive about it. And then all of a sudden they're talking about 2-1 buy downs and all these different things.
It's overwhelming. Yeah, it's so overwhelming.
Is if you've been through it at least one more time, you're like, okay, all these things I know how to manage or where to be concerned. And I don't have to worry about now 1,000 different checklists. Because there really is, if we looked at it and just talked about all the little decision points that had to be made and all the little points in the contract that need to be assumed or understood, that's why they need professionals.
Yeah, it's like we're behind a curtain, kind of, do all the stuff that nobody wants to see because it's not fun and it's it's complicated, and then they get to see the pretty. I describe it as like Wizard of Oz. We're behind the curtain there, and they see the big, nice, fancy thing, and I always describe to my first time buyers as like I'll draw on a piece of paper and just scribble, and I'm like, this is going to be like a roller coaster ride. It's going to be, you're going to have these high moments and then these low moments and these turns that you weren't expecting. Yeah. But we're going to get you from here to here. Yeah. And it's going to be okay. But there's going to be a lot of this in the middle. And some of it you might not even realize is going on because we're trying to handle it on the behind the scenes for you. Yeah. So, I mean, I can see where it is overwhelming for the first time buyer. I just want them to not be scared of this market because I'm like, to me, this feels better for a first-time buyer in this market. It made me nervous in the last market for them because they were just willing to overpay for product. And, and my whole thing was, I might not be able to get you out of this in 5 years. It just depends. Yeah.
Well, and that's a reality we have to be very clear with people is, and full disclaimer, as much as we talk about things and get excited about things on the podcast here, or Ashley here, that we ultimately don't know.
No.
Right? And that's where I think people need to be educated for themselves. Yep. We'll provide best data and let people make decisions. But that's where trying to go to then, and even this is a sideshow. You and I were talking about, you're like, and even you told me something I didn't know in lending. So thank you, Ashley. Kudos. That's like an award. Because I try and be on top of everything, and that we're even finding out that Fannie and Freddie, so for conventional purchases, are changing then the loan pricing, right. Where some folks are benefited, but your decent credit and like well-qualified credit and 20% down people actually might see if, and this is the tricky part when we go to this. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because that's where if it was apples to apples today, and then we're dealing with this adjustment, your costs just got a little more expensive. Right. But then what we have to remember is that we are anticipating rates to come down. Right. So again, in my conspiracy theory, I just think this is profiteering by Fannie and Freddie saying rates are going to come down, so you won't notice that we're going to all of a sudden Fannie and Freddie are going to make a little bit extra as they come down.
But I think it's good for people to know kind of things coming down, that might affect them, because if you are thinking about a second home or I'm at the age where we're starting to think about my daughter's going to college here in a year and a half, and we probably would rather buy a place, like a little condo or something than rent something. So, if that's where people are at, this is, it makes sense for them to, hey, maybe you want to think about, doing something a little bit quicker than you were going to.
Well, I think the big piece, and I keep calling it like a let's make a deal market in the sense of the rules of the game are changing. Yeah, they're constantly changing. And that's the other hard part is, again, people, as the rules of the game are changing and they're just trying to learn this game, and then it's going to be changed up on them again. So I have case-by-case basis. Each individual is different. Each deal is different. Right. Some things might work out. There might be some seller goodwill here in the future that a 2-1 buy down works for someone. Right. The way I see this playing out right now, though, just real talk here, my best guess is I feel unfortunate, and I do say unfortunately, I would love as normal as much as possible, but I don't think we as human beings do normal very well. Right. And as our markets...
and normal changes.
And so my concern is that I think maybe the next month or two might be a pretty decent situation as far as buyer-seller negotiations, maybe not breakneck speed. Of course, highly desirable properties or highly desirable price points, all bets are off. But I think I have all the data that we are looking at. I have the feeling, and that we've kind of seen then anecdotally this proved out, is that there's this big sideline of
they're waiting,
just waiting. Yep. And as soon as a certain price or a certain property, or as soon as rates then get general public back into the game, that I think this gets a little ugly again. Yeah. I think this is like a 2021 repeat. I'm hoping not to that same extent. I'm hoping not 30 buyers to a place, but still I think still competitive. What do you think?
No, I totally agree, because it's, it's one of those things where I was kind of telling somebody that, okay, back in, 2020 when COVID first came out, everybody just stopped. Everything stopped. Yeah. And then it got to be the new norm. Everybody's used to wearing masks. They were used to, all the protocols and everything. And I think the rates have kind of gotten the same way, where at first it was like, oh my gosh, the end is, the rates keep going up, the world's ending, and no one's going to buy a house. And now it's like everyone's used to it. This is the new norm, you know what I mean? And because we never saw those rates before, you know what I mean? Those ridiculously low rates. I mean, my first house was 7%.
Yeah.
You know, and then our second house, I thought was a smoking deal back in 2008, and that was 4.5%.
Yeah.
And then the last house, I think our last refi, we did it at like 3.6. And I'm like, and then they dropped even farther than that. And yeah, I mean, it just, everybody's I think they're starting to get used to the norm. But I totally agree. I think there's a bunch of people kind of waiting on the sidelines. And that's why I tell buyers, I'm like, if the timing's right, I mean, I always think it's down to timing. Like if your timing is right, you can't time the market. But for you personally, if you need to move up, you've outgrown your home, you can't try and time the market. You know, it's going to do its thing. And you just need to be patient with it. But if you need to move up, I mean, you're not competing against a bunch of people right now, which is kind of nice, and a lot of different market, and they can get more for their money. They're not having to give away their inspections. They're not having to, I mean, it made me uncomfortable. Like the last market, it was where I was generally concerned, where I'm like, no, why are we overpaying for this? And then you see, other values in your own neighborhood, and you're like, I wouldn't pay for that, but I think sellers, it took them a while to kind of get used to the market, but they've gotten used to it. They're used to a normal market. It's kind of like a normal market right now. It's a normal market, normal inspections. We're asking for normal repairs. The negotiations are going on, during the inspection period, which is kind of nice because I feel like it's still, even though some sellers might not see it this way, it's still a win for the seller. It's still a win for the buyer. The buyer's getting the home. They're not having to compete against, these crazy offers and everything like that. The sellers still have a ton of equity in those homes. I mean, it's not like it has lost value. I mean, unless they bought it like right when the market shifted. Yeah. But give it time. And it will come back. But they haven't lost anything. It's just they lost, I think, the vision of what that home was worth 6 months ago.
Well, and that's in the when we start trading with houses, it's not real. It's not, right?
It's kind of like Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many stories have I heard of like, oh, my uncle owned a piece of Bitcoin, and if they just held on to it, I'm like, well, if we all just, right? But this isn't, with the exception of some like super aggressive like investor buyers, right? This isn't a day trade. No. And that's where anyone that says, I'm not committed to this for 12 months or really 3 years. I'd say if you're under a 3-year pretty firm time gap, don't get in. Yeah. Don't get in. Yeah. Right?
I think the normal used to be like about 5 years? Yeah. It was about 5 years to see some kind of growth, equity build up. I mean, sellers have seen an insane amount of equity and growth. It's insane. I don't think it's ever, I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think ever before in history has home prices accelerated to that much equity in a home, where it's like like I said, I'm optimistic, and it's like they need to look at it as the glass is still half full. They still have that equity. Yeah, it just might not be what it was then, but they weren't ready to sell then either.
No, and you have to be realistic on what would you have done, where would you have moved, are you still in Flagstaff, and but my thinking and thought is that many other people on the other side of things say, well, if it's historically up, then it's going to come down. But I think that's the hard part is because of this new normal. If it was just all things were equal, then things would need to have slowed down. If this was just purely charged by a pandemic, this funky economy and a lot of shifting within the country and remote work, force and different things. But the supply and demand undercurrent of this market is what people need to understand that we just already covered, right? Yep. And that's where we're saying, okay, if we didn't have this massive sideline of buyers, then you'd be correct. Things would come down. And because of this massive subsidy on interest rates for too long that created these massive values, then we would be dealing with a different market. But no, inflation's taken hold. There's a reason you're not paying 5 cents for gas anymore. Like this just charts up. Right. And unfortunately, that's my feeling is like, this is a relative new normal for prices. Yep. I don't see a lot coming off of this. And
I think it's been pretty flat the last couple of weeks. It's really just because I pull like the market reports for my buyers and sellers every week, and it's pretty flat, just flat, but it takes time for that to kind of build up too, because you're not going to see what's on those market reports is the closed and the new listings and everything. So you're not going to see those prices go up until you start to see closings happen that were 30 months 30 days ago. Yeah. Those are then you'll see them on the market report. Yep. So now it's like we're just kind of in this holding pattern right now. Yeah. But things are still moving. And I mean, inventory's still low. I'm still having to pick up the phone and call random people looking for if they want to buy or if they want to sell their place, because I have a buyer that wants to buy in that neighborhood and there's nothing. Literally nothing. So, I mean, that's where I'm like, I don't see prices going down, at a drastic rate or anything like that when I'm still having to call people to try and convince somebody to sell their place so that my buyer can buy their place.
And I know our zip codes are different on the months of inventory. We've spoken about that quite a bit there, that, in the bubble burst, there were like 13 months of inventory. So tons of houses on the market, not a lot of people out there buying them. Right now, I think 001 is sub 2 months.
Yeah, about that.
And 004 is like in 3-ish? Is it close to 3?
3, I think 3.
Okay.
So...
And normal is considered like 4 to, like 6 is the standard, but I think it's really, like I've heard other realtors say more 4 to 6 is kind of more buyer seller equal market.
Right. It's still a seller's market. I mean, we're still in that category, even though it doesn't feel like it. Yeah. But I mean, prices they're kind of just holding right now. But I think what's nice is that you've got sellers and buyers that it's almost a nicer transaction. It's so much nicer. Yeah. There's so much less like hostility and emotion and stuff in it. And they're willing to work together, which we haven't seen
for 2 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's nice to see both parties wanting to, make the best of it and make it a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. So that's maybe takeaway number 1 is conditions right now are good.
Mm-hmm. They're good.
Get off the sidelines now.
Yeah.
And if you're serious about this, do your education, talk to your experts. But let's kind of go with our fatalistic perspective of how things could get a little interesting or ugly here. If we were to repeat 2021, but on a smaller scale, right, of competition,
right,
heating up here in the summertime, and that's I think. So when you were talking about earlier too of folks getting comfortable, I also think people need to understand how markets work with herd mentality. And as much as you don't agree with that, I'm sorry.
It's so real.
It's so real because perception is reality.
Fear of missing out.
When things are going up and up and up and up, and then everyone's jumping in on that bandwagon and writing crazy checks and things, like everyone was doing it.
Yep.
Right? We have the stats from the market closures. It's like, it was, I wish I had this off memory. It's in the amount of trillions more in purchases happening.
Right.
Even in that high market, right?
Yep.
Because of rates, right? So when we say, okay, rates were 7 and now they're 5, that perception being reality of like now is go time. And we very much think rates are going to hit that in May.
Right.
Right in that spring, hot summer buying season, that all of a sudden everyone and their dog is going to be out buying because rates are down.
Right.
It's time to go.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, so let's talk for sellers.
Yep.
Because buyers are going to be hard. Sellers is like, well, do you need to make an extra 100,000 now or later? No, for that seller, that says, hey, Ashley, I'm not in let's talk 2 different types of sellers. Maybe you can add another one.
Yep.
There's the one that says, I would need a life change.
Right.
Right. I need to move up. I need to move out. I need to move to a different, I'm tired of the snow, whatever.
Right.
What do you say to that person?
I mean, it's really when is the perfect time for you? I mean, and I can attest this myself. We bought our move up home when it probably would have been considered, if COVID hadn't happened, it probably would have been considered the high of the market. And I knew that. Yep. I knew, but the timing was right. We could get a great price for our home, and I could also do, a seller contingency. Okay. And so it was a great market for that. And that was 2019. And so that was like at the end of 2019 we did this. So it kind of was pre-COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
But I knew that, it probably was the high of the market. But at the same time, it was the perfect time for us. And I was like, I'm not planning on selling this home in the next 2 to 3 years. We're probably going to be here for a little while, while the kids are through school and everything. So we have time for this to kind of, gain equity and whatnot. And I'm not worried what the market's doing.
Yeah.
So for that seller, is it the perfect time for you? Do you have a home to sell? Because if you do have a home to sell and you need to sell that home in order to buy another home, this might be the a great market for you because sellers are way more open to taking that seller contingency than they were a year ago. A year ago, it was not even a question. You were out of the running if you had to sell something. Yeah. For now, they can totally do that, and they can look and they can find the right home and not feel like they're playing musical chairs. Okay. Where I think before sellers were afraid to give up their chair.
Gotcha.
So now you can, if you need to do that move up or that move down, I think it's the perfect market.
Okay. So if I'm summarizing that if they're comfortable now,
right,
and their timing is flexible, that right now could be better.
Yeah.
Than if things really get heated up.
Exactly, because they could always refi the loan. They could always and get a better interest rate in a couple of years or a year or even 6 months from now.
So it's almost like finding it in that middle ground, right? When we're really slow.
We're kind of in the middle.
And I've had a couple clients that have listed and said, hey, we'll list, we'll see, and then we'll pull it and try again because we're flexible, right? And I think that was a great strategy. They listed, they saw, and it wasn't great. But now I'm like, well, that's not maybe June. And it's not maybe now, but in the next 30, 60 days.
Right.
Where you can try and hit both at this little middle up and coming.
Right.
Where you can get a decent deal on yours and still get some decent terms and have a little bit, like you said, nice transactions.
Exactly.
On both sides.
Because had we waited till, even 6 months later, if we would have waited 6 months, and who knew what was coming, down the pipeline with this whole thing. But if we would have waited 6 months, there is no way we could have made that transition that we really needed to make because we had been in our last house for 14 years. Yeah. So we really needed to, some more room for the girls and stuff. And so it was one of those things where if we would have waited 6 months, there's no way because no seller would have taken a contingent offer. Yeah. They just wouldn't have. And so it was a perfect timing, but I think it's, is it the right time for you? Is this what you need? Sure. But this might be the right market for you to do it in too.
So perfect. And then if it's someone that's more opportunistic, right, and totally flexible and just says, I want to make the most amount of money.
Yep.
Cashing out, selling an investment property, or doing something where time is not as sensitive. When does that person list this year?
There's still buyers out there in this market. And I think the hard thing that some people don't realize is that even, if you have to sell in this market and you just want to change, you want, it's just, you want to move on to something else. Okay. Sometimes it's somebody who has a condo for an NAU student or they've had a summer home up here forever and all of a sudden the kids are grown and they don't use it anymore. Yeah. It's still a good market for you. It's not the market where you just put the sign in the ground and you sit and, almost like out on your front porch in a lawn chair and you just wait for the buyers. It's not that market, but there are buyers out there. You just have to, I always tell my sellers, I'm like in this market especially, we have to go find the buyer. And it's and I try and do it opposite of thinking backwards, who is, if there was a buyer for this, who is my perfect buyer? Sure. Okay, where do they hang out? What do they do? What, just trying to really get in the head of what is that buyer? Yeah. And then let's go find that buyer. Because they're there. It's you just have to find them. So, I think it's one of those things where a lot of the news makes it seem like, homes just aren't selling, and they are. You just have to find the buyer for it. Yeah. So it's, it's just, there's a little more, I don't know, it's analytical and a little more thought process and creativity and thinking outside the box in this market. Okay.
And so it sounds to me like, generally speaking, in each seller, case by case basis, because you might say, hey, this is going to be a bloodbath no matter when you list. Right. Right. Because there are those properties. Right. Right. And we're seeing those. And so, but yeah, so it very case by case, but it sounds like it's really just up to seller timing. Yeah, there's a lot of optimism on that side.
Seller timing, and I think if you had a really odd, unique, hard to sell home, the last market it should have sold then. Yeah, it really I was calling my clients that had some of those homes, and I'm like, it's now. We need to do this now. This is now. This is now because there's not a lot and they're flying off the shelves and no one's going to care, if your laundry room is 2 stories down. And that was the market for it. Where now it's you have to be realistic. If you have that house today and you didn't sell it back then, you wanted to sell it, you need to adjust for it in price. You just do.
Yeah. Okay. It's a lot of optimism on the seller side of things. And I think, to that point too, in sellers thinking is there really a bigger time to capitalize than not? I would guess, and I would be curious in your opinion on this, I think a lot of experts we're seeing are expecting small single-digit appreciation numbers. Mm-hmm. And so that's a moderate. That's really safe. Right. Take your time, right? There's not this big swing, that's going to be like, right. An extra 10% equity in your house.
I think I'd heard like 4% maybe is what they were kind of
so estimating. We'll see. But saying, hey, it's not massive. Your timing is more important than anything, and the right buyer and the right deal, right? But I think speed, right? You might sell it faster. Right. In the summertime, that's that's more typical just to seasonality in general.
Right. But you're also going to have a lot more competition in the summer with a lot more sellers, so I've always kind of like with the Flagstaff market, I've kind of watched it where I'm like, okay, over the years, it seems like the sweet spot, if you want it to go faster, has been like after obviously the snow melts.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
After the snow melts, but kind of before that June hits, because the peak of our market is July. Yeah. So we have the most amount of homes on the market in July. So if you're a seller, you're competing with a lot more sellers at that time, but there's more buyers in the market too. Because usually when Phoenix starts to heat up, then, like my summer home people, they start to all of a sudden get more active in the market and want to look to come up here. But there's this kind of sweet spot in, the market here where it's like, okay, maybe end of February before May hits, there's not a lot to look at. Yeah. And there are buyers still looking. People, obviously, they move. I mean, they're not just moving in the summer. Sure. Job relocations, all that kind of stuff. People move. So there's kind of that nice spot where you might time it just right in those months where if you're a seller, you put on the market, there's still buyers out there looking, but you're not competing with, if you don't have a remodeled kitchen and your neighbor does. Yeah. You're not competing with a whole bunch of that.
Gotcha. Let's take it account.
Yeah, I think it's your more realistic buyers and your more like serious buyers are in the market at that time. Yeah. Because they're obviously looking. If they want to trample through snow, they're serious buyers. Yeah. And the sellers, same thing. If they're selling during that time, they really are interested in selling their property.
Which there's a lot to be said for that, right? Because how many times did we hear this? I think cash, historically speaking, is about 20% of our market, and it got upwards of like 25 to 30% of our market.
It was crazy.
And on top of that, they started to build a bad reputation for themselves. Yeah. In the like, hey, here's this really high cash offer, sight unseen. They're from no offense, or they're not local. Let's not say where they're from, the valley. But they're non-local, and they're going to come see it on the weekend. And and smart agents that started to track this said, hey, let's take it, but let's tell your second person, like, hold on for 2-3 days.
Yeah, or I would make
or take a backup.
Well, take a backup, or I would even make make sure that at least they had seen it, on audio, or not audio, but like video or something. But it was like, there was, and then once the market started to slow, then we were like, they have to see it in person.
Yeah, there's a lot of cash fallout.
Yeah, a lot of cash fallout.
Because it became a game to some extent. All right, you can see that. Is if it's some bench there, take a pot shot. Let me even see if I get it before I even drive out.
Or they weren't familiar with the neighborhood or the area, and it was a quick impulse kind of purchase.
So... or offer. Yeah, because they're not even committed to it. Because they, again, probably not their first time around the block, and they knew the terms, and they'd bow out, get their earnest money back, or maybe not even hit their earnest deposit within that time frame, right? And so let's then talk, then for buyers, if we were to repeat a 2021 market, how do we prep buyers to say, hey, great, find an amicable situation in the next 2 months? It's a tight time frame. If you don't find that situation in the next 2 months, what do you need to be prepared, and how do you position yourself to try and get something in the summer?
I think like right now you need to be talking with your lender, talking through the pre-qual process, getting all your ducks in a row, as I tell my buyers. Let's have everything ready to go so that when it is go time, you're ahead. You're ahead of the herd mentality, the frenzy that's going to happen. You're ahead of that. And I think also, making sure they're, paying attention to their credit score. Credit score is going to be a huge part of it too, just for the interest rates. That could make a big difference in their interest rate. So I think just having all your ducks in a row, and then probably being really, aware of like what they want. Like, what is it that you want, and is it the price going to fit, talking with the lender about what they can afford. There's just getting everything ready to go for that moment so that you are ready.
Yeah. And it's almost, to me, as you were talking through that, I was thinking of like when you're sitting, luckily I don't visit hospitals or doctors very often, knock on wood, but when you're sitting there and they're like, hey, there's going to be a little pinch, right? Or the dentist or something, and then they put the needle in, and then because you, like we're talking about, you're trying to analyze what's going to kill me here, and because they gave you that warning and you kind of anticipate and you get that little pinch, like it's workable. Right. Well, at least for me, my kids still like probably all sorts of freak out. But I almost think that that's what that buyer needs to understand. Like, all right, here's some opportunity. And then if we hit the summertime, there's going to be this pain point. Right. You're going to feel it. It doesn't mean we can't move forward. Right. But you're going to feel this pain point of additional competition. So what are the things we can do? Right.
Yeah. And I think just having them prepared for that is good, because I mean, I look back and it's like, I have some buyers that, were looking 2-3 years ago, and now, they're still renting. And those rents have increased. And so it's one of those things where if they would have just been like, okay, you know what, this is what I can get in this market. And I think sometimes it's just a realistic thing. Some buyers have to be realistic about what they can get in this market. But once you get your foot in that door of owning a piece of real estate, instead of you paying for, your landlord's mortgage or whatever for their property, it's better for them to have that benefit themselves. And just be prepared for it might get crazy, but it's okay because this is going to be worth it in the long run. Because then I think some of those buyers look back 3 years ago and they're like, wow, I could have owned a property and it would be worth this now if I would have just kind of, stuck with it through the crazy period and gotten what I needed. I could have this, and then I could move it up. I could sell today and move it up into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house instead of the 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo. Yeah. So I think it's just a process, but I think buyers just have to be realistic about what can I afford here. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm like, the first Flagstaff house we bought, it was not our dream house by any means. Yeah. It was not. I mean, my husband walked in the door and said, you've got to be kidding. We're not doing this.
Yeah. No, very much starter. And I think in a lot of ways, jumping right back into where it is that sense of reality that, I think a lot of people just have to deal with in this market of knowing, do I want to make it here? Am I really that tight to Flagstaff? And knowing it is not an easy town, right? And I talk to everyone, whether it's a, first-time home buyer just working on their dual income, husband and wife or husband, partners and trying to figure out how they make that work, or even talking to, and you and I have done this, it's crazy to me too, when you find your upper income class folks still saying like, oh my gosh, I'm settling.
Right. It's hard. And it hits all different price range where they take a look at the Flagstaff market and, well, I don't get as much, and it's a lifestyle here. Yeah. It's a lifestyle. And I think that's, one of the things when you're selling here too, you're selling not just your house, but you're selling the lifestyle of Flagstaff as well.
Yeah. And with that, one of the things I think is really important, for people to understand is that there are things we can control and things we can't control. Right. And that's where we're saying, like, hey, you can't control it. If you want this price point, you want this payment, you want this scenario, that's going to get you X house, right? Or you're going to have to be comfortable with a certain commute or something, right? And these are very, very personal trade-offs that people have to deal with. But one thing I do want to stress to people, and this is something where if we had to do 2021 over again, what I would be more of a fanatic about, like, to the extent when I say fanatic, I mean fanatic, right? Is when we are sitting down with a buyer, right? And we're working with a client together, and they are trying to figure this out either for their first time or a second home, and they're kind of trying to get a feel for the market. I would say that over 50% of people want the data that we will give them to give them an idea of range and piece, or to help them understand how that changes the homes that they can be looking at with you. Right. But that 50 to 75% of those folks don't take it as serious as they should to say, I want to be full doc qualified. Right. That, they've said, hey, this is my hourly raise, this is my salary. I know it, Chris. Tell me the homes I can look at. Show me some payments, and I'll go look at these homes. And, you need you need that last year W-2, or you need, the bank say, I have the money, Chris, that, and we kind of operate like we want to, and this is increasing with, human psychology right now. People don't want to be high committal to things just yet. And that I get all this. But if you don't send me, I'm preaching the choir. I know when I'm telling you this, but we had a lot of people where, I'm having a list agent call me, and it's freaking competitive.
Right.
And I'm having to say, like, hey, they told me they have $200,000 in the bank. They, their salary, this all looks good, but they're saying, well, the boxes aren't checked that you have the documents. I'm like, well, that's because I don't.
Right.
Right. I will ask the client again, because we have and always do. But that's where my thoughts on this is I know it could be, we'll have to see as competitive as it gets in price.
Right.
Terms, all these things play into a factor. But my thought is, if I were sending a pre-qualification letter with a loan status update that shows that we've already been literally through underwriting and are only waiting on an appraisal to be able to send out closing disclosures and fund the loan within the 7-8 day fastest time that you can legally close a loan, right? Obviously appraisal could take longer than that.
Right.
I think every single person I talk to needs to be in that position.
No, totally agree. Because, when the frenzy happened, it was, we're scrutinizing those prequals. I'm looking at everything, even down to let's just say it's a condo and the prequal comes in and I've got, 5 offers on the table, or sometimes it was like 12, but you have all these offers on the table, and I'm looking at these prequals, and the prequal, either there's if there's an error on it, or if a VA box is checked and the condo isn't VA qualified. Yeah. It automatically, that buyer, they wasted their time too, because they could have been looking at something else that was. So I think it's one of those things where buyer needs to, they need to have all that stuff submitted to you, so that prequal is fully filled out, ready to go. It just makes them look more solid, and then usually, we're calling the lender to find out too, hey, is there anything that we might need to know that might cause this to fall out? Anything unexpected coming that you could foresee, or even though you can't foresee it, but is there any, kind of gray area where you're like, I don't know yet? So, you need to have all your, T's crossed and I's dotted and everything to your lender filled out, so that way you are ready to go. Because that prequal, when some of them were very vaguely filled out, no W-2s, no, and that's just, you're just kind of asking for like an underwriting question, where you're like, it's questionable if we're going to get through underwriting.
Yeah. And as great as they think they could be qualified, and I just think it's so important that the industry right now has capacity, right? There are, in a lot of, with just the volume decrease and everything, there's a lot of, we have staff that have moved to more like flex hours and different things. So there is time in the industry to ramp up, do the extra due diligence, help these people get competitive. And that's where, again, it's not everything, but it's the things that add up that I think that people don't realize. Like in some situations, maybe you never had a shot at it, right? A big cash buyer comes in, they're going 50 over, good luck.
Yeah, you never know. And I think that's where the market got interesting too, because if there was so many different offers and like options to those offers, that I think, sellers, they might have chose a conventional over cash. If it was, if they often did. Yeah. If they had full loan approval, if they waived the appraisal, there were all these different things that made all of a sudden that finance buyer compete against a cash buyer, which hadn't happened in a long time before. It was like cash buyer was king. Yeah. And it was like they were kind of on equal playing fields for that time period.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other like light cash products out there. But there's a cost to them, right? Yeah. And so I think there's
always a cost.
There's always a cost, right? Yeah. And so it's a matter of saying, hey, the simple road of being a fully pre-qualified client, which is if the lender is going to go through that process, and then it's in the client's hands to then get every piece of documentation that's needed, right? If you're going to get some gift funds, provide the statement from the donor, right? Right. Do these extra things so it's not like, everything. Mom and dad will do it later, right? Just do it now. Because those little things are going to add up.
Yep. Or even like I had a client that he wanted to do a VA loan, but he didn't have his VA certificate. And so just even that process, we lost like 2 weeks in that process, just waiting for that so we could switch to the VA loan. Have all that stuff ready to go. and just kind of think through the process of what you might need and talk with your lender about, what you will need ahead of time, and your realtor too.
Sure.
So, and I think it's almost the same as like on a seller side, sellers, I like to give them like a net sheet. That way they know when an offer comes in.
Are you going to get it or no?
Yeah. I mean, an offer comes in and they're not having to calculate in their head, what's my profit going to be after my loan's paid off and title fees and everything else. It's just having all that information so you can make a really good decision and not be rushed in the decision.
Yep. And I think that's the key part, is that there is space and time before things start cracking. Like, do as much homework, ask as many questions, figure this out, get an idea, kind of some pregame on this is how things are going to kind of look. Here's the pinch, here's the, and then as things start happening, it's just going to be so much smoother, so much better, and so much more optimal. And not only being able to negotiate properly, protect yourself on the legality of the whole transaction, but then just having that's 30 to 45 days, plus listing time. Yeah, having your mind during that time frame might be kind of important for the rest of the things in your life.
I mean, I look at it as like, I'm a huge college football fan, and so like love college football. And it's like pre-game plan. Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the other team's going to play. Just like we don't know what the market is going to do, or when it's going to change, or when a frenzy's going to start. But have your pre-game plan in place, do your research, kind of know what might happen, so that way you can get everything you need to give you the best play possible in the new market.
Yep. And having a team, so with the big game, we can't probably say things with copyright. They're terrible with that stuff. But the big football game occurring this weekend, that analogy is perfect. And then saying, hey, but then you need the right team to exhaust it, right? You need the right players on your team,
and everybody to be in. Like everybody needs to, kind of like you and I are talking. Yeah. When we have a new buyer, and we're like, okay, let's get them this. And then I can pull, different listings for them, and price ranges, and get them set up on, so that they have an idea. And I always like to do it before they're ready, because I want them to see kind of what's happening with the Flagstaff market, how fast are homes going, because I think that's always the hardest thing, is like when they don't realize that sometimes it does move really fast here. And they're all of a sudden like, oh, I thought we had like a week to decide on this, and it's gone.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's, all of us, that's what we are. We're a team, Yeah. So us, title, we all kind of work together to create the best game plan for you.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and I think it just is like, no one can see the future right now, but I'm optimistic. I think there's opportunity. I think that, I can't think the thing I always go back to in trying to make decisions is to say, someone buying a house now, are they going to be happier or less happy in 5 years from now?
Right. Yeah.
And I think everyone needs to answer that question for themselves. Mm-hmm. And again, their personal life, their plans, their changes. But if they are going to be here in Flagstaff, and they want that stability, I feel fairly confident with the stats and things we're seeing that is a pretty firm yes. Yeah. And that they would be at a lesser advantage by terms, price, opportunity in 5 years from now.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, I look back at, buyers that 3-4 years ago, and were contemplating it, and, are still renting. And it's like the rent, it's going up with inflation, and you have no control over it. Where at least like a mortgage, you have control over it. And rates may be higher right now than they have been, but they can refinance it. But you got the home for a great price. You weren't competing against other people. You were able to sit and think about it a little bit longer and really, decide if it's the right place for you. Yeah. But then, life happens, and sometimes people move and stuff. But the nice thing is that Flagstaff, our home values have always kind of, even though they have, ups and downs, it's not like the rest of the nation where you see big ups and big downs. It tends to follow a very kind of normal, a normal rate, I would say. And then if you, for some reason, if it didn't make sense, there's not enough rentals here either. So, you've got options, which I think it's one of those things when you look at different investments too. Real estate's a great investment. It's tangible. You can touch it. You can touch it. And if you aren't using it, you can rent it.
Yeah. There, you can get so down that rabbit hole, and just the optimism of it, yeah. And I think that's a key point too that I try and make to people is, the old adage of you get what you pay for, right? And saying, hey, if these values were super, super low and super volatile, that you could get lower strike prices, but then that's going to come with lower rents. That's going to come with more market volatility.
Right.
Other things that markets have, that our Flagstaff market is, yes, it's expensive.
Yeah.
But that it's a cost of stability.
Yeah.
And along with the other associated things that you can do with real estate, of higher rent market, of higher desirable, like you are getting what you pay for. You pay for a little bit more, but you're getting quite a bit.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I think it's, people just have to see, you get your foot in that door, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I love that Flagstaff has higher prices. I love that, there's the competition in the market for these homes here. Yeah. And like we talked about in the beginning, those factors of the Flagstaff market, they're not going away. Yeah. They're not driven by interest rates or anything. They are driven by just physical location here. So it's, it makes it huge for people just to realize, yeah, it may not be your dream home, but just get your foot in the door, and then you can roll that equity into the next place, know?
Exactly. And it's tough. And then everyone I talk to, and you and I, we have those experiences, right? It was hard. It was difficult. They made decisions. It kind of went fast.
Right.
And again, as long as they're not planning to be unstable with their personal lives and all of a sudden trying to sell in 6 to 8 months or something, because yes, there are plenty of cases where buying a home doesn't make sense.
Right.
But those other folks where it's like, all right, and I love, especially like that move up. Yeah. That move up where it's uncomfortable. There's so many different factors.
It's a perfect time for it because they have time. They have time to think, and they have time on both sides where they could get their house under contract and still have time to find a place, and they have choices. Yeah. They have choices now where, before it was I think we were showing maybe one house at a time because there was no other options. Exactly. Where now it's buyers, they, we go look at houses, and we're looking at, sometimes I have to limit it because I'm after 6, it starts to blend together. And they're so they look like a deer in headlights where they're just so overwhelmed by all the options and choices they have right now that they can't keep them all straight on which one was which. So usually it's 5 to 6 is kind of what I limit them to, but they have choices. Yeah. And they might not have to decide that day. They could wait, 24 hours. 48 hours and really kind of think through it and talk through it and make it, a good decision. Because, that's the thing. It's I don't want someone to buy a home just because they feel this market frenzy herd mentality. They have to do it. Yeah. And then, 5-6 years from now, be like, oh, this isn't really what I was planning. No. This wasn't what, I wish we had this. Or, oh, the house down the street now is for sale. I wish we had that house. Sure. So
you got to be committed on it. But then that's where I think when we have the people that do the homework up front, and then know it's going to be uncomfortable, but they know it's a good pain and a bad pain.
You prepare them for it.
Right. And then again, it's I think that's a good, important point of knowing hey, when are we pushing too hard? This is not right. We just let it go. Yep. Or, hey, we're going to be uncomfortable, but that's life right now. This is never going to be the most comfortable thing ever. Right. Like you said, all buyers go through, investors or second home, whether they admit it or not, go through this little swing of this is going to be awesome. This is the worst thing ever, and just the emotions of so much time, effort, and capital on the line. But when we see people come on the other side of it, it is so extremely rewarding.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I usually try and prepare my first time home buyers because I keep hoping as the years go by, because I think I'm coming up on 8 years now. And so as the years go by, I keep hoping this will go away, but it hasn't. I get teary-eyed, Chris, every time I hand keys to that first-time home buyer, because I'm you are part of I consider it a life moment. This Absolutely. Is a life moment, graduation, wedding, birth of your first child. This is a life moment that you never forget because you own this largest investment you're probably ever going to have. You own it, and you're holding the keys to it, and it was hard, but it was worth it to do it. It wasn't easy, but I think when something is hard, it makes it more worthwhile.
And people just don't understand, too, of how much impact that has, right? And the amount of people like, hey, you hope, and I don't have statistics on all this, but the amount of people like investing in their own 401ks and investing, in markets, like it tapers off pretty quickly after just retirement accounts. But then, and we know that statistically proven, the majority of net worth is in people's homes.
Right.
And when you and I are talking to someone then 5-10 years down the road and they need to make a change, they need to do something. And this, I know this gets up in the kumbaya of it all, but it's like, you have equity, right? I'm talking to people that are able to make big life decisions because of that housing decision.
And some of them, like, they've been in those homes for 40, 50 years. And it's like, all of a sudden, they're seeing, like, they probably saw 3 or 4 down markets.
Sure.
It just goes through it, they just kind of float through it. And then when they're ready to sell, no matter what market it is, it's like they still have the equity in that home.
Yeah.
And it's physical right there.
Yeah, exactly. I should look this up. I forget if it's in the 80s or 90s, but like the last 40 years or something, it's been like a 300% appreciation rate for real estate.
Right. I mean, I don't think we see that in our 401ks,
No.
Nothing like that.
No. So you and I could get euphoric on it all. It will be careful. But yeah, I think, being paced. I guess, any final closing words here on what you'd recommend for any buyers or sellers right now?
I think it's just you have to really analyze if it's the right time for you, and you have to do your research on your local market, not the national market, because I mean even when the market was starting to change, it was like we were seeing something different on our side than what the news was putting out there, and it's the same thing right now. I mean, the last 3 weeks they've been very, very busy. Yeah. Very busy. And to the point that I don't even know the last 5 days what day it was, And so I would just tell buyers, you just need to get ready, and you need to talk with the lender and make sure you've got everything ready to go. If this is, if you do want to make that move up or move down, but if you are making that transition from a move up or move down, you might want to move sooner than later, because it's a great time for it right now.
I love it. Awesome. Well, everyone give Ashley a call. And Ashley, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Chris.